All right, welcome everyone.
Well, looking at Robin Williams' chart, they did describe his childhood as being in a wealthy home, but very, very isolated.
Could Robin Williams connect due to the lack of houses of association in his chart? Even certain syndromes in the autism spectrum, such as Asperger's syndrome, where people can be geniuses in certain ways. And I'm not saying Robin is. I'm not somebody who can make that judgment. He's not somebody I ever spent time around. But for persons who have that form of autism, they may be quite brilliant in some ways, but they don't have the capacity to either connect easily with people or to be able to delineate social rules. And that, we know that he was genius. Everyone said that of him. But that could also be part of it. And then if we looked for, I would have to look at charts of persons in the autism spectrum or who have been specifically diagnosed with Asperger's to know if that was going on. But we do know from the chart that he had friends. The 11th house is moderate, 9% of his power. But if we look at the houses of association, as you pointed out, they are the weakest trinity in the chart, having only 13.4% of the power. So,
But when you see in somebody's chart that they don't have much going in the association trinities, can you think of that?
you can, or you can at least think that alliances with others are of lower importance in their life.
Well, and it's the only one of the trinities that's in the discord category. All the others are positive, and that's minus 6.83.
Good thing to point out. And even though that's a very small amount of discord,
It's
because
still
it
the
is his,
only one.
when it's your discord, you
Yeah.
feel it. Even in very harmonious charts, discord is felt. And sometimes, Laura, I've found it's felt even more because the soul isn't necessarily that conditioned.
There's only one other thing that's discordant at all, and that's 0.56 of discord, his earth element.
Right, and if you look under planets, you'll see that it's an extremely harmonious chart, 74.31. Those are last week's, but that is the chart we're talking about now. Did anyone else have any input, questions, insights, aha moments based on the material we covered last week?
I have a question, Christopher. This is Alice.
Thank you, Alice.
The thing that I'm wondering with Robin Williams' chart and with Buzz Aldrin's chart, my understanding is they were both bipolar rather than just depressive.
Okay, and you've actually done more research in this than I have. So
Yeah.
that's information I don't have, and it is hard to know with that. Again, I'm one of those astrologers that doesn't try to explain everything with astrology. I do believe that environment and conditioning is a factor, that genetics are a factor, that the astrological chart is a factor, that the individual's desires and willpower are a factor, and they all combine. So there's certain things we don't know, but in some of these charts that we look at today, there's going to be a history of depression in the family, which might indicate that there is something genetic there. One thing that Zane repeats throughout the lessons, what I did learn in scouring the Brotherhood of Light lessons in preparation for these two classes, is Zane does not mention depression, but he does speak of mental illness. So he speaks of mental illness quite often as being discords between Mercury and the Moon. both which are planets that govern the mentality. Mercury being our rational thinking and the moon being our more intuitive, impressionable, subliminal thinking. But the moon is to some degree more right brain, and Mercury representing a more left brain capacity of language and rationality, and the moon being more irrational. That's where we pull in information from sources that we can't always identify through a logical process. That's something to look for in charts, and certainly that can be discovered in charts where there is a distinct affliction between Mercury and the moon, which there is no aspect in Buzz Aldrin's chart. There is also no aspect between Mercury and the moon in Robin Williams' chart. We might need to then look at what was going on by progression, perhaps at the time of their incidents. If there's no more questions on last week, what I'd like to do, I'd like you as students to work on some delineation, and we'll start tonight with Buzz Aldrin's chart. We're going to go in order tonight: Buzz Aldrin, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Art Buchwald, and talk about them. Also, several of you, I'm very grateful that several of you responded after last week's class with charts that you would like me to look at in this series. Where I do the majority of my research is on a site which used to be a license-only site, but now it's open to the public, and it is Astro Data Bank, ASTRODATABANK.com. But I would like to direct all of you as students and researchers to this data bank, which is thousands and thousands of charts collected by Lois Rodden over decades of time. And Lois Rodden's standards are what we use in determining the validity of birth information. For the sake of what we're doing, we're sticking with the AA data. The charts in that are sorted by any number of things. So as you get familiarized with that site, for example, in doing research for this class, I found one AA chart with depression. At the bottom, you'll have a listing of all the qualifications of that chart, how it has been sorted into categories for study. And if you go down there for psychological disorders, depression, you can push that, and it will take you to a whole list of case histories with a history of depression. Again, you need to double check. You have to go to each chart and look at what the data rating is, whether it's A, B, C, or D, to determine whether it's worthwhile looking at. But this is a tool I would actually like you to use as students, because I think it will really aid you as researchers and give you, whenever there's something notable happening in the news, you can then go in and search to see if there is any information on those persons, celebrities, or newsworthy persons, and find their birth data and sort of follow along by the factors in the chart. If there's a biography that comes up on PBS or the History Channel, go and get the chart and study the chart as they talk about the person's character. It is one of the most insightful processes that you can do. All right, who would like to give some comments about Buzz Aldrin's chart? We came up with some standards last week. We decided that depression is a Saturn experience. However, I don't believe that it's a Saturn type of experience, because depression is oftentimes accompanied by terrific self-absorption, which is very Saturn. Depression more than often comes from an area of our life where we feel lack or something's missing. rather than where we feel a surfeit or an abundance of something. However, my observations have been that there can be the presence of Saturn in the chart, but usually it can be traumatic life experiences involving any planet that actually impacts the type of depression we experience. For example, a progressed opposition to the sun could bring about experiences that impact one's self-esteem or their standing or their sense of importance, or attacks on one's reputation or ego, and that those experiences could plummet someone into a depression. The moon, of course, can be one's moods in general, or things that are influenced by family or the domestic environment. Mercury oftentimes comes through situations of grinding concentration or even obsessive thinking. Venus can be over matters of love lost or unrequited. Mars, things that bring up your ire, your irritation. Jupiter, more than likely, you're not going to have depression under a Jupiter aspect unless you're having too much of a good time and you're therefore having liver problems. Saturn, of course, it's easy to spot. Anything that involves loss, poverty, long periods of health problems. Uranus is sudden changes. And this is something Alice Marie already mentioned in matters of bipolar syndrome, that she has seen Uranus as a factor. And we know certainly with everyone I've known with the bipolar disorder cycles differently. Some people can go through cycles very quickly. Other people may spend a long time either in the manic or depressive phases of that. But Uranus can trigger sudden events or what might even be electrical storms in the brain that may trigger that. What I've found about Neptune depressions is Neptune spawns the type of depression that comes from disappointment. When one has dreamt or fantasized about the future or what their life should be like, and then they get there and things have not turned out. By 32, they're not married with children. Or 50, their spouse leaves them. Or their child turns out to be an addict. There's things that happen that are grave disappointments, and there's difficulty adjusting the facts of life with what the fantasy or the imagination or the hopes one had about their future. And Pluto depression oftentimes comes through obsessive thinking. Question or input, Paul?
Saturn seems like it would be associated to a certain extent with depression, but in the charts that I've looked at, it also seems like the moon is going to be a big factor. And so I wasn't surprised to see that the moon is in a pretty heavy T-square, even if not in an angle. And that's the thing that stood out to me.
In Buzz's chart?
In Buzz's chart.
And so far, Paul, in the few charts that we've looked at, moon afflictions are what have stood out in each of these persons, either in the natal chart or at the time of the event progressions were triggering that. All right, does anybody want to look at the components of the T-square?
Well, there's Pluto in Cancer in the second house, and the moon's in the fifth in Libra. That's a pretty tight square. And then the moon's a little looser square to Mars and Venus in the eighth, but that's a packed eighth house too.
Well, and let's look at the Astrodyne report for the moon. If we go down the column, the moon is not high up However, the moon is highly discordant, and Buzz Aldrin's chart as a whole is highly discordant. Would anyone like to dissect these aspects? Any thoughts about a moon-Pluto square? Emotional obsessiveness, I like that.
Oh, it's just Holly here, and what my thoughts are, the moon squaring Pluto would be kind of the need for unconditional love and belonging, kind of symbolized by the moon, would be wounded in a sense with the square to Pluto.
So there could be a lot of neediness there that comes out of that aspect, where it could be hard to fill someone up because the bucket might actually have a hole in the bottom, and every time you go to fill it, it's just draining out at the same time.
You feel unloved, but couldn't you also feel that way with the square?
Yes, it's the only difference is it is milder. Now, there's also a difference in the dynamic. Oppositions are much more powerful than squares, but the dynamic is set up in an opposition where you can choose to live on one end or the other. And that is the way you mitigate the stressful conditions that it creates. As long as you're going back and forth, I want this, and I want this, but I want this, and I want this. You're constantly being torn. So it's a matter of choosing which end you will allow to win out. With a square, it's not as easy, because squares tend to be these repetitive, much like the obstacle course. You leap over a hurdle, what's ahead of you? Another hurdle. You leap over that, what's ahead of you? Another hurdle. So the square aspects tend to bring repetitive experiences, and so these are also difficult. The moon is also opposing Uranus. And so, back to you, Alice Marie, we may see this somewhere along the line as a factor in bipolar syndrome. Does anyone have Robin Williams' chart accessible? Okay, where is his moon? It's at 9 degrees, Pisces opposing Venus, and it was forming a trine to Uranus. So we're not seeing a pattern between the moon and Uranus here, but they are in aspect.
Could be a mother-father thing going on there, because that was 4th to 10th house.
True. Yes.
Moon, Venus.
So, now if we look at the moon, which is moods, in Buzz Aldrin's chart, the moon makes no aspect to the sun, but it does square Venus, Mars, Pluto, and it opposes Uranus. And Venus opposes Pluto. Mars opposes Pluto. So this is definitely a very tense T-square that's happening here. I'm going to give you a little information about him. Most of you know that Buzz Aldrin is an American astronaut, and he was the second man to walk on the moon, which was July 20th, 1969. Neil Armstrong being the first. He wrote 2 autobiographies, Return to Earth and Men from Earth. In August 1996, Aldrin published his first novel, an adventure drama written with sci-fi novelist John Barnes. Aldrin graduated 3rd in his class at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, earning his wings the following year. He graduated in 1951. After his lunar excursion, all right, the moon's tied up in a T-square. After going to the moon, Aldrin became troubled by depression. And by October of 1971, he was hospitalized for depression. So I've progressed this chart to October 15th, 1971, since we don't know the exact date, but it falls in the middle. There's some interesting things going on with the aspects, and so that I don't dominate this laboratory, I'd love somebody else to pick out an aspect and talk about it.
Christopher,
Yes, Holly.
I'm just noticing that the progressed moon at 15 degrees Aries is forming a square with that Mars in the 8th.
Correct. And what's going to happen afterwards? In a 3-month period of time, it'll be opposing the natal moon.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I haven't calculated the lunar progressions for you. Zane feels that that lunar progressions by major progression are noteworthy, but they are weaker than major progressions, but stronger than transits. I personally, the moon is the dominant planet in my chart, and as I've mapped my life over the years, I've personally had very significant events happen with lunar progressions, triggering events almost to the date that they become perfect. It's not the case for everyone, but yes, you pointed out something good. Progressed moon is an exact square to Mars at that time. It will be moving up to square Pluto and to oppose the natal moon over a course of a 3 to 4 month period by progression. No doubt this was a very challenging time in his life. But look at the position of the ascendant at 29 degrees of Cancer. What is it doing by progression in the chart?
I have a question about that, Christopher. This is Alice.
Well, you first have to tell me what it's doing, Alice.
Oh, well, it's opposing the sun.
Thank you. All right, and your question, ma'am?
Well, my question is about that. Can that be a diminished self-concept?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The ascendant represents our sense of self, and the sun is our need for self-esteem. Well, this is happening right after he walked on the moon, came back home, and where did he go to work? He ended up working for public relations at NASA.
So
And
it's
it's-
made him a poster child and this shallow emblem.
And part of that could have been due to the fact that he was already experiencing a disability.
The depression. Uh-huh.
Prior to being hospitalized. So that could have been a factor, but definitely with the sun in a chart, when there's an opposition like that by major progression, as you said, Alice Marie, a diminished sense of self, which I thought was very eloquent. This is something that impacts our ego, our sense of self-esteem, our self-worth, our status may feel diminished. Diminished status oftentimes comes when we think about somebody else who may have gotten more attention than us or done better than us. And so once again, what happens is we dial into the Saturn element, which is lack or loss, or somebody got it and I didn't. So it's quite possible that that is part of what was going on at that time. And again, something that's not present in the biographies, but who knows? Maybe there was also some type of economic crises going on at this time. One of the side effects of bipolar syndrome, if this is truly what he has, one of the side effects can be mania, where one takes on debt, where one just starts to spend. And so who knows if that was something that may have been going on during a manic period that could have preceded the depression, if indeed that is what this man was experiencing. But I would guess that there were definitely some deep crises going on over self-worth, self-identity, and the relationship to one's financial self-worth. Maybe one of the other astronauts ended up on the Cheerios box or the Wheaties box, and you know, it ascended opposing sun as situations of one-upsmanship, or feeling like somebody else has stolen your thunder or stood in your limelight.
Especially since the 8th house has to do with other people's resources, or the debt thing could involve other people's money there
Right.
as well. But seeing the love go to other people instead of yourself could be involved.
Any other input or questions on this chart?
Yes, Christopher, it's Holly here, and I'm noticing that his progressed Saturn is squaring his progressed Uranus.
Excellent. And that's going to be a long-term aspect, lasting about 24 years. Because Saturn moves pretty darn slow.
Yeah.
So under aspects like that, from the slow-moving or the outer planets, they oftentimes create that background noise in our life, or those really long lifetime trends of thinking that are going on, that affect us.
But he has that natally too, so isn't that kind of an underlying theme of this whole life?
It is. The natal Saturn is at 6 Capricorn and natal Uranus is 7. So oftentimes progressed aspects from the slower moving planets are actually reinforcing natal aspects. And basically what that does is it just adds more energy to that natal compound. All right. Now, in last week's class, we certainly discussed with Robin Williams and with George Lopez that, according to the biographical information we have, they also had addiction issues. And in 1978, Buzz Aldrin was also faced another problem, which is alcoholism. And certainly persons that suffer from depression, be it chronic or mild, or especially persons with bipolar disorder, oftentimes self-medicate in an attempt to try and gain some impact or control over their moods. But ultimately, the use of drugs or alcohol spins out of control.
What happened in 78?
He, at that time, decided to treat his alcoholism. All right, let's look at the next chart, which is Arthur Conan Doyle.
Created Sherlock Holmes.
Thank you.
Wow, look at that 12th house.
Yes, what was Sherlock Holmes?
A writer.
An incredible detective. Plus, Sherlock Holmes had a drug problem.
He wrote detective novels. There you have the 12th house involved. What were some of the factors we looked for in terms of depression? We looked at Saturn, the moon, natally, Mercury. And I'm wondering, I think in some of the charts we looked at last week, there were... Robin Williams had the opposition from 4th to 10th. Another chart we looked at, it was Gwyneth Paltrow's chart, where there was oppositions to the midheaven from the moon and Saturn. Moon-Saturn conjunction opposing the midheaven.
Is she a depressive?
Yes, and we covered her last week.
Sorry. I missed that. I didn't know that.
Postpartum depression.
Right. Part of what we're looking at is that there's so many different types of depression. And postpartum is very serious, but it is generally temporary, but it is a very definite form of depression. Here, Arthur Conan Doyle, Saturn at the bottom of the chart. Okay, it's in which house?
Third,
And what does the third house rule?
thinking, communication.
Oh, right. So with Saturn in one's third house, what would be the hallmark of somebody's mental processes?
Not optimistic, structured, heavy.
Okay, I like to go for worst case scenario and best case scenario. So you just gave a good worst case scenario. Saturn in the third house, and in the chart of ACD, Saturn is moderately powerful. It has 8.2% of the power and a minus 49.19 discordines. So it is an extreme discord. So chances are, Michelle, your delineation was correct. Now,
But-
best
but-
case scenario,
Yeah,
Saturn in the third house
But with
is
structure.
structure, system. People with Saturn in the third house
Right.
like to take on very intense mental processes. One thing we know about Arthur Conan Doyle is he went to medical school. And that is generally considered a very much like law school. It's considered to be a very rigorous discipline, which it requires something like Saturn in the third or in the ninth house to pursue those types of studies. You're doing something that does not come easily. Saturn is in Leo, which also means it's going to be squaring at least 2 of these 12th house planets. You'll notice with Arthur Conan Doyle's 12th house, we have planets in Aries, in Taurus, and in Gemini. And this is due to the fact that he was born in Edinburgh, Scotland. And once you start moving really far north, this is, below the Arctic Circle, it's at 55 degrees north. The house cusps have a much greater proclivity to have interceptions. So that's why 6 out of 10 planets can fall in one house here and span 3 signs of the zodiac. So Saturn in the third squares which 2 planets in the 12th house?
Pluto and Mercury.
Thank you. They're in Taurus. So remember, the basic rule with oppositions and squares is if they are in the same quality, movable, fixed, mutable, there's a chance for them either to be in an opposition or a square or a conjunction.
And once again, we have the moon sticking out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, exactly square the sun. No, that's a trine to the sun, actually.
Right, but what's it doing to Saturn?
And what's it doing to Mercury?
Here we have depression and the moon.
Yeah.
The moon opposes Saturn. Well, that is, when I've looked at charts, that is one of the best indicators. Conjunction of the moon to Saturn, opposition of the moon to Saturn, square to the moon to Saturn. So, Paul, you see a moon, Mercury square,
T-square.
which Zane would say, great indicator for mental illness.
Right.
Why would that be? In a sense, the 2 sides of the brain aren't getting integrated when there's oppositions or squares between the moon and Mercury. Your non-rational and rational thinking are in conflict with one another.
So it's also always in your face. You can't get away from it.
Nor can anyone else.
It's so cool that he took it out on his writing and created an alter ego character and, developed that to the hilt.
Right, and I think it's important that you said that, Laura, because I think this is a real indication of what can be done to save one's life. And creative projects, when we are engaged in creative projects, time stands still. And we forget about the things that are bothering us. So, I want to give you a little biographical information on author Conan Doyle.
You know, and in a way, just thinking about that, the alter ego aspect, Watson was also an extension of, you know, the two aspects of his torn apart Mercury. The clash between Sherlock and Watson all the time expressing sort of the two different sides of the brain, and, you know.
And these characters, I mean, they're still on television. How many versions of Sherlock Holmes have we seen over the decades of our lives? I mean, it's such, there's something so important within that relationship, but also where we love the, you know, discovering that trail of clues. All right, Scottish writer best known as creator of the characters Sherlock Holmes and his colleague Dr. Watson, as well as historical romances. Knighted in 1902. The son of a civil servant with 7 children, Conan Doyle escaped by reading for hours on end. That's where he developed his love of literature. Remember Maya Angelou's chart? She also did the same. It was her way of escaping from the harsh reality of her existence. He received his education at Stonyhurst Jesuit School. He was Catholic, followed by a year of study in Austria. He received his medical degree in 1885 from Edinburgh University and practiced medicine until 1891 before devoting his time to his literary work. While in medical school, his dad was institutionalized for depression, epilepsy, and alcoholism. He remained institutionalized for life, a source of great sorrow to his family. Last week we discussed that there is a predisposition for depression within families. Upon graduation, in order to financially help his family, Conan Doyle served as ship's doctor on an Arctic whaler for 7 months. During this time, he nearly died of typhoid fever, fought a ship's fire, and had a close call in meeting a shark. In 1881, Conan Doyle was beginning the dark periods of depression that plagued him for the rest of his life. I've progressed the chart to June 1st, 1881, for us to look and see if there's anything outstanding here. Over the years, Conan Doyle developed insomnia, nightmares, depression, and mood swings. He sounds like Sherlock Holmes. His first story was published in 1879 while he was still in school, but he primarily wrote as a diversion. His medical practice went by the wayside as the demand for Sherlock Holmes stories brought a good livelihood. Conan Doyle had a keen interest in parapsychology and psychic phenomena for most of his life. Well, where would that come from?
That 12th house stuff.
6 planets in the 12th house. 12th house is the dominant house at 30% of the power.
Plus, Neptune's squaring Jupiter in the first house, so that would add some energy to it, wouldn't it?
Yes, ma'am. It certainly would. And at the time of his major depression, the first period, the progressed moon was forming inconjuncts, was forming a trine to Neptune and an inconjunct to Jupiter. So it was triggering the energy tied up in that square. Again, the moon is quick. It's only an aspect by major progression for 2 months, but nevertheless, it can trigger something. In the last years of his life, he held nightly seances at home and underwrote the establishment of a psychic bookshop, library, and museum. He spoke in Paris as acting president of the International Spiritualist Congress. Conan Doyle died of heart and kidney failure July 7th, 1930, in Crownborough. So let's look at his progressions.
Did he marry?
I think twice, but I didn't put that biographical information in. Yes, he had a long
Seems
time.
like it could be the chart of quite a loner.
Right, and what I find when the ruler of the seventh is in the first, it's the tendency of the individual to place their partner on a pedestal, or sometimes to place their needs before their own.
Oh, that's interesting.
So this is a loner who may have valued marriage. And chances are, writing is actually a solitary occupation. Seeing patients is not.
Right.
And if you put your mate or your object of affection on a pedestal, it's hard for there to be true intimacy because you never really.
You're not peers.
You know what?
You're not peers. So there's always some, if somebody's on a pedestal, also the other thing that can happen is you can come crashing down.
And, that ties in with the square to Neptune, the clash to reckon with between his ideals and his romanticism and the reality that he was actually dealing with.
Is there anyone out there in internet land that wants to point out an important aspect that could have been a source, by progression, a source of depression?
The progressed ascendant square the progressed Saturn.
Thank you. And also, it's also aspecting Mercury. It's in a semi-sextile to Mercury. And Mercury is forming...
Wait, ascendant.
a sextile.
They're just one sign apart.
Yes, progressed Mercury is at 9 Gemini. The ascendant is 9 Cancer, 30 degrees apart. And then 9 Leo, which is another 30 degrees apart. So that's a semi-sextile. Mercury forms, again, this is a northern latitude chart, so if we're just looking physically at the chart for the aspects, we're going to get all screwed up. But if we look at the degrees, Mercury forms a sextile to Saturn. Harmonious aspect. It's a harmonious aspect from a discordant planet. Look at the astrodynes. In the natal chart, Mercury is the second, or actually the third most discordant planet in the chart, with minus 23.56 harmonides. So, even though by progression we might think of a sextile as being harmonious, it carries with it the weighting of the conditioning that's found in the natal chart. All right, I'd like to move on to the last chart of the night, and then I want to do a little summary. Art Buchwald. I'm going to give you his bio first, and then we can look for things in the chart. American Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, columnist, raconteur, and bon vivant. Hope you all speak French. When he was only 3 months old, Buchwald's mom entered a mental institution. And what did I progress this to? 6/30, 1963. So again, we're looking back at a pattern of mental illness in the family. Chances are you could have certain aspects of the chart if there isn't a history of a certain illness. If you don't have the heredity combination with the astrological constants, there may be less of a chance. Once you start adding astrological constants to heredity, and then to environment. It's like the 3 cherries in a row at the slot machine. He was placed in the Hebrew orphanage in New York. He was raised in 6 different foster homes and saw his dad once a week. He joined the Marines in 1942, saying they were the best foster family he ever had, and saw action in the South Pacific. Moved to Paris in 1948 and wrote a regular column, Paris After Dark, for Herald Tribune. Buchwald was the subject to bouts of suicidal depression. He spent a month in a hospital in 1963 and again in 1987. While institutionalized, he wrote a book, Leaving Home, a memoir of his traumatic childhood, pinpointing the depths of his crippling depression. In 1994, Buchwald went public about his illness, giving a voice to the some 17.5 million adult Americans who suffer from clinical depression. Buchwald was able to antidote the misery of his youth by turning to humor. His syndicated humor columns and cartoons printed in 510 newspapers. Buchwald was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Outstanding Commentary in 1982, and in 1986 he was elected to the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters. On June 16, 2000, he suffered a stroke. He later died of kidney failure in Washington, D.C. on the evening of January 17, 2007. All right, let's look for natal chart constants. Let's look at Saturn, Moon, Mercury.
Saturn's on the midheaven.
Saturn's on the midheaven. The Moon and Mercury are semi-sextile. What's going on?
To each other.
Is that Pluto-Jupiter opposition
Right, which is
squaring up with that Saturn?
T squared to Mars, probably the most discordant aspect.
okay. Paul has pointed out something. We have a Jupiter-Pluto opposition, and both form a square to Mars. Jupiter 15 Capricorn in the 12th house, Pluto 14 Cancer in the 6th house, Mars 14 Libra in the 8th house. So the Pluto opposition is fairly strong, though the most powerful aspect in his chart is a parallel from the Moon to the midheaven. Not unexpected for somebody who became syndicated, became a household name.
Oh, yeah.
Moon in the 10th house, paralleling the midheaven. It's in the sign of journalism, Sagittarius. Here's a chart that's only overall mildly discordant, but there's a family history of mental illness. So we have the heredity factor in place, even though the planets don't necessarily, for me, show strong indicators, except the Moon is dominant, it's in the 10th house, and the Moon conjuncts Venus, semi-squares Mars, semi-squares Jupiter, and squares Neptune.
Oh.
Here might be the form of depression that comes from life not necessarily turning out to be all that you expected it to. Where was the Moon at the time of his depression? The thing is, I did not know the actual months that he was institutionalized, and so I picked the middle of the year. There is the possibility the Moon is 3 degrees from an opposition to the Sun in the chart. So there's a very good chance that this could have happened in the first half of the year when the Moon was actually hit opposition. And for that 2-month period, there would have been intense internal turmoil. Another thing that's going on at the time of the depression. The progressed ascendant enters a conjunction with
Uranus.
Uranus. And what does Uranus bring? Nervous anxiety, nervous tension, sudden changes.
And in the sign of Pisces, which can be associated with institutions.
And what's the worst quality of Pisces?
Predictions. Delusions.
In our keywords, we say that the best quality is sympathy and the worst quality is worry. So this may have created a period of extreme nervous anxiety. There may have been sudden changes going on, and chronic worrying could have taken place at that time. And with the moon, possibly if this period of institutionalization happened in the first half of this year, then the major progressed moon would have been in opposition to the sun in the chart. And we've seen before, in I think 3 men's charts, that oppositions to the sun have brought on these bouts of depression. So we have a few minutes left. I wanted to discuss some things. I've always said when you drive a VW Bug, you suddenly notice every other VW Bug on the street. And since I've been working on this topic of depression, not only have I been really aware of the clients coming to me who are suffering from this, but the message is sort of out there in the world. Has anyone here watched the BBC series Downton Abbey? Watching episode 4 from season 1, which actually deals profoundly with the issue of paralyzing depression. What's happened in the story is Matthew Crawley has died in a tragic automobile accident. And this season opens with both his mother and his wife being in this paralyzing depression. And so the story is about their mourning and loss and the state that they're in. Both in the story, both women discover re-entry into the world and a means to process their loss through the intervention of a concerned party. For Matthew's mother, Mrs. Crowley, it's the Dowager Countess, played by Maggie Smith, who advises Mrs. Crowley to look outside herself and take an active part in their grandson, and to find a new philanthropic cause to support, to engage herself in something outside of herself. And Harson, the butler, oversteps class boundaries to suggest that Mary honor Matthew's memory by taking an active interest in the estate on behalf of her son. So this is played out on the screen really quite marvelously as a solution to depression. It is not always as easy as that. In cases of depression which have been triggered by a loss, grief, sorrow, the alchemy of moving one's attention outside of themselves. Again, when we're depressed, what are we thinking about? Ourselves, our hurt feelings, our losses, what's missing, where we have lack. And the natural antidote to that is to move the attention outside of oneself. For Mrs. Crowley, it was to engage in philanthropic cause. In a sense, when you're working with persons less fortunate than yourself, your problems can diminish. Now, not always the case in really severe depression or chemical depression, where dealing with other depressed people may just depress you further. Again, we have to be careful in looking for just a simple solution for this. But again, as astrologers, you are going to find people coming to you for the mere fact that they have not received the answers they want from their therapist, from their physician, from their clergyman, or whoever the support systems are that they happen to work with. And they will oftentimes go to the shaman or the ritual specialist or the esoteric counselor, trying to find the causes or understanding of that. So one of the things in alchemy that we do is get persons to focus on something outside of themselves, which is oftentimes the source of depression. Whenever we think about what we don't have, you're almost guaranteed to be unhappy. I would encourage all of you to do that over the next couple of days. Take about 10 or 15 minutes to think about what you don't have or what's missing from your life. Note your mood and how you feel. And then I want you to switch your attention to thinking about what you do have, where the source of abundance is.
That's why the gratitude list is such a oft-recommended therapy.
Oft-recommended. It is probably one of the most important therapies. The other thing is, one of the things you can encounter in extreme depression and with clients, if clients have been through a list of medical or mental health professionals and are coming to you, sometimes one thing that they're looking for is the magic wand approach. They want to know that things are just going to automatically get better without any effort on their behalf. Guess what? It doesn't generally work that way. Because this is a Saturn condition, it requires determination, perseverance, and more importantly, the cultivation of new habit systems to change conditions of depression. Those that are within our power to approach mentally. But I am going to encourage that this week, all of you that own Course 14, Occultism Applied, go and read Chapter 2, Living the Completely Constructive Life. If you don't have this, go to the Church of Light website and find under the Brotherhood of Light lessons where the serial lessons are and choose number 152. The important part to read is a couple of pages that have to do with converting discordant thoughts and emotions into those harmonious. It's really quite profound. It is most of the chapter. However, there's really key information in here about the source of our thinking, how habit systems are formed, and the way in which we go about forming a new habit. Because keep in mind that obsessive trends of thinking are merely a habit system. And he also, the part that I am going to read to you, is that Zane gives an affirmation in Occultism Applied. And that affirmation is, I am alert to observe the approach of thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are disagreeable, and in their stead, I entertain only pleasant thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Whether you're clinically depressed or not, this is something that we all need to work on. Even those of us who have spent 30 or 40 years reading the Brotherhood of Light lessons still have the opportunity every day to go back and readjust our thinking on just about any subject matter that comes up in our life. Zane says, by repeating this affirmation several times before each meal, And the reason I interject here that he's talking about the meal is part of establishing a habit system is the importance of associating a new behavior with a particular activity. Most of us cannot go without eating 3 times a day. So by associating it with a meal, we're ensuring that we are practicing the affirmation. So again, by repeating this affirmation several times before each meal, the attention of the unconscious mind is directed in an effective manner to what is expected of it. And as the idea embodied in the affirmation grows in power through daily repetition of the suggestion, it will gradually transpire that every time a disagreeable thought, feeling, or emotion commences, immediate notice of it will be taken, and one will be fully aware it is an important matter that it should be changed into a more pleasant channel. Unpleasant thoughts, feelings, and emotions cannot be changed into those pleasant by merely willing them to change. If they are to be changed, and each can be diverted into a harmonious channel, certain fundamental psychological laws must be observed. Some things it is better not to think about at all. Other things are legitimate subjects of thought, but because they're real or fancied importance, they occupy the mind too persistently. We think the same thing over and over without making any substantial progress. This we call worry. Worry, like other disagreeable thinking, not only creates discord in the astral body that tends to attract misfortune, but by wasting energy and destroying confidence, works to defeat its own end. It is better also when the duties of life do not demand contact with such things, not to think about anything that gives rise to fear, hate, rage, disappointment, grief, sorrow, anxiety, or any other disagreeable emotion. But it is not merely to will to stop thinking about a given situation or event. The laws of psychology demand that in order to stop thinking about one thing toward which the interest is attracted, that the attention must be diverted to some other thing that has about it an interest, spontaneous or acquired, that is equally intense. I call it replacement therapy. You replace one trend of thinking with something else. And you know your habit system is to want to go to that item of irritation, worry, fear, anxiety. But whenever you catch yourself, you continue to replace it with something else. So that is one of the paths by which we can lift ourselves out of those depressions over which we might have some control. The other is in developing interest outside of ourselves, which take us back out into the world and not into solitary obsessive thinking.
Excellent class, Mr. Byrne, and I loved what you just read. That was really powerful.
Well,
Thank you.
I'd like you all to go in and read the rest of that chapter. It is so pertinent to what we've been discussing the last 2 weeks. On the menus on the left, it'll start off saying spiritual meditations and exercises, who we are and what we teach, Brotherhood of Light lessons, course books. So if you don't own this in your library, you then go down to Brotherhood of Light lessons and course books. It'll start off with a picture of C.C. Zane, and then you can see the different books, and you go below that, the 210 lessons by lesson number.
Okay.
And what was the lesson number I gave you to look up?
152.
152.
So go down to 152, and it says Living the Completely Constructive Life.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
You
so much.
click onto
That's
that,
all I needed.
and
Yeah,
you
I
read
know.
it.
There, thank you.
Anyone else out there want a closing statement? All right. It's been a pleasure having all of you here. I'm not sure what we're doing next week. Depression is quite a theme, but I may take the opportunity to look at some of the charts that you sent in. All right, good night, everyone. Pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Christopher.
Thanks, Christopher.